jazz artist extraordinaire. His name is Dr. Adam Booker. Just a little bit about him first. He started playing bass professionally at the age of 16 in San Antonio with a lot of our local musicians there, including the group Small World and Ron Wilkins. In 2001, and I got this all from your website, so feel free to interrupt. My brother enlisted in the U.S. Navy, where he was assigned to U.S. Navy Band New Orleans until the end of his enlistment in 2006. Upon his honorable discharge from the Navy, he returned to Central Texas and became very well known in the Austin music scene, performing with the Chris Kimura Quartet as well as various other groups. He completed his doctorate in his doctorate of musical arts in jazz double bass performance at the University of Texas, Austin in May 2012. Congratulations. And he currently resides in Duluth, Minnesota, where he is the assistant professor of applied bass and jazz studies at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. And as if that wasn't impressive enough, he just came out with his first debut CD as a band leader. It's called Unrivaled Rival, and you can get it at Shifting Paradigm Records. It's www.shiftingparadigmrecords.com. And so he is here today to talk a little bit. I know for myself, when I started National Novel Writing Month a couple years ago, I relied a lot on some of the fundamentals of jazz music that Adam and I grew up with. We grew up in a really musical family. Both of our parents are really musical. Our father was the director of the Jazz Ambassadors in the U.S. Army for several years. And so for us, creativity was just a part of our lives and a part of our, having a strong instinctual artistic process. But when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about on my blog and maybe in these broadcasts is I really want to talk to people who are really focused on creativity. And I don't know anybody more creative than my brother. And so, he literally has to stand up in front of people every night and blow their minds musically. And I can do that after about maybe 100 revisions. And he has to do it on the spot. And so I figured, why not talk to him a little bit about his process and maybe to think about what jazz fundamentals can bring to us as writers. And I know most of the people listening to this right now are writers and looking for ways to spark their creativity. So that's what I wanted to do today. And so, Adam, I was hoping that we could start out, because I know not everybody has grew up in a jazz family and maybe doesn't. Jazz family isn't familiar with, the anatomy of a jazz song. So, we were talking previously before, when you stand up to play your bass in the middle of a song, it's not exactly the point where you want to go get a drink. It's actually something really exciting is happening. So maybe you can kind of break that down a little bit. Like, what is the anatomy of a jazz song? What is the solo, the importance of the solo in the jazz song?
Well, let's just start with the basic structure of a typical jazz song. Now, in most jazz that you've heard, call it like the top 40 jazz standards. We call them jazz standards first off, because they're standard repertoire that all jazz musicians know. Songs like Stella by Starlight, Autumn Leaves, Take the A Train. There's a book. It's called The Real Book. It's about yay thick. And it's just full of charts, just chord charts. There's like chords and melodies, nothing else, very basic stuff. So we take these standards, and there's basically two main types of standards in most of the jazz repertoire. One is called the blues. And it's not like the Delta blues where you're thinking of like Robert Johnson sitting playing guitar going, oh, that's part of it. That's a fundamental aspect of the music. That's kind of the roots of where a lot of the jazz comes from. When we say blues, we're referring to a 12-bar form, a 12-measure form. So it's, not to get too academic, there's, 3 statements of 4 measures each, right? That's a 12-bar blues form. The other type is, we call it the 32-measure American song form. It's an actual form that was I'm not going to say anything stupid. It's just an American song. I was going to try to think about who who we say created that. Think about tunes like, well, gosh, I don't know how jazz educated everybody is, but it's either the blues or it's a 32 measure form. All right, now your typical 32 measure form is created with 2 A sections, 1 B section, and then the A section restated. So it's 8 measures, 8 measures, 8 measures, 8 measures. I don't know if you've noticed there's a pattern here. So far we've talked about 4 measures and we've talked about 8 measures. So right off the bat, we're looking at music that's base 2 math or binary math. So yeah, that's pretty much what a standard jazz song looks like. Now in performance, what generally happens is we play the head, what we call the head, which is the melody of the song, and it's close to its, we could call it like a prime form, close to its original form or how it's written out or how we memorized it, or, you know, you get to a certain level where you're not even looking at a book anymore to learn songs, you're just lifting it straight from record. So, and then, so we play that. Sometimes we play it twice, depending on the length of the tune. Usually a blues will get played twice, like the actual song itself will get played twice. On a 32 measure form, usually we only play it once because it's 32 measures. It's, you know, almost 3 times as long as a blues, so we don't need to. But those are usually the faster ones for some strange reason. I don't get it. So after we play what we call the head, we play the melody once or twice, depending on the form. Then we go into a solo section. And the solo section is nothing more than just the harmony from the original tune in its original form, be it blues or 32 measures, played over and over and over again by the rhythm section. They're playing the same things pretty much that they were playing during the melody, but now the improviser has to develop his own or her own melody over this harmony. And that's the solo section. That's the improvisation.
So essentially, you take this idea, like the A train, like you must take the A train, and then you just go crazy with it. Like that's the fundamental. You take that melody, and you do what with that?
You could do anything you want with that. That's the beauty of the improvisation, and you know, that's the beauty of creativity in there. Now, you know, I teach jazz improvisation here at UMD, and it's on my syllabus. It's like the first line on my syllabus that says, "Playing an improvised solo is not, quote unquote, just making it up as I go along."
Right.
Which is actually, I'm kind of, this is a topic talking with writers and creative writers about improvisation, because I'm sure you guys have your own set of techniques that you use to develop ideas and stuff. But from a jazz standpoint, what we're taking is harmonic, melodic, and rhythmic material, and we're reworking it much as the same way a writer would take a subject, a verb, a predicate, a noun, or prepositionals, and reword it, you know, to create an actual written line. In jazz, we do the same thing. We just, our tools are harmony, melody, and rhythm.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's so interesting, those parallels, is that, you know, like you were saying, music has, you know, it's not like you can do anything. If you play a funky, crazy note that's outside of, I don't have the music terminology, but you know what I'm saying, that's outside of that, that key or whatever, it's going to sound terrible. It's like, you don't want to create something terrible.
Sometimes you do.
But sometimes you do, and I want to talk about that. Like, I want to talk about that. But I think there's also that this idea that you have to kind of work with these materials and manipulate them in really interesting ways. And I think, and you also, you know, you have the line, you know, you must take the A train or whatever it is. And you have to work it in a way that sounds original and fresh, and it's like beyond what people might predict. You know, for me, like I write romance, and so one of the challenges I found in writing romance is that love is just, it's so cliche. Like, it's, you know, how to get to that authentic place where you know, you're not just like, hey baby, I love you, you know, like it's boring. Like you want to say something more, you know, profound about love, but how do you say that when, you know, you have thousands and thousands of years of people have been writing about love? I mean, what can you say that's new? And I think it's kind of the same challenge in jazz. You know, I know for fans of jazz, you know, they've heard A Train, or they've heard, like you said, Stardust or whatever it was, you know, a million times. How do you how do you take that song and make something new out of it?
Yeah, boy, if I had the answer to that, I wouldn't be working. um, that's my honest answer right there. You know, I'm not as concerned with saying something new as I am concerned with saying something cogent in a solo. Um, it's kind of a practice in humility. You know, I'm never going to be able to play a solo on Stella by Starlight the same way Charles Mingus would play a solo on Stella by Starlight. You know,
Right.
and I used to want to. I used to want that so badly. I used to want to sound just like Charles Mingus or just like Ray Brown. These are all famous bass players and improvisers. And I think, you know, I got to a certain point where it's like, and believe me, when it came down to it, I studied these guys. You know, jazz musicians, what we do is we study the solos that they play. Literally, we put on the record and we try to write them out and perform them in real time. We, you know,
Wow.
yeah, that's part of the job. That's part of our studies. And you know, so I've transcribed dozens of solos by both of those artists, and those are only two of like I can't even count how many guys that I've transcribed. But you know, it got to a point where I just didn't. I realized I'm never gonna sound like them. So now when I play a solo, I want to sound like me. Of course, me sounds an awful lot like them still because I've stolen so much information from them. You know, Igor Stravinsky had the best line ever: "Good composers borrow, great composers steal." Well, it's the same thing with jazz soloists, I think. You know, and
That's funny.
really,
In writers, we say T.S. Eliot said that. So I don't know who actually said that. But it's but it's a great line. I mean, you know, use it. I think you can use it in any discipline and just name whoever, someone famous.
right,
And
exactly.
it's true.
So
It's
that's
really
the idea. I've stolen so much from my heroes, and it's not really. I will call it homage. We're playing homage to our heroes more than that. And for me, it's more like developing a lineage because jazz is very traditionally based these days, at least. It wasn't always that. It used to be like. I saw a great. I was at a clinic with Charles Lloyd, a great saxophone player who was around like back in the day, but you never heard of him until recently. But he was one of those guys that was like hanging out with Charlie Parker and hanging out with John Coltrane and Bill Evans and all those guys. And you know, he said back when I was a kid, if somebody said, "Hey man, you sound just like so and so," you'd punch them because the goal was not to sound just like so and so. The goal was to sound just like yourself. Nowadays, we seem to be really focused on, wow, man, you sound great. You sound just like Ray Brown.
Yeah.
That's cool. But I was, you know, it's kind of funny when I was younger, somebody said, man, you sound just like Richard Davis. And I just didn't have the heart to tell them I'd never even heard of Richard Davis. You know, it's yeah, we're really big these days, at least on traditionalism. There's a lot of artistic politics involved in that I try to not involve myself in. Now I'm just, whatever, I'm just going to go back to the practice room and work on some stuff. You know?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of nostalgia there too, to kind of bring back the old days, you know, and you see that in writing too. It's, I don't know, but no one says I sounded like.
It's really easier. It's an economic thing. It's really easier to sell the public on the tried and true versus something experimental.
Right, that's what I mean.
Especially the pragmatic American public.
Yeah,
for better or worse, we tend to, in this country, like stuff that we know and tend to fear things that we don't.
Yeah.
So
okay, so we talked a little bit, you talked a little bit about transcribing, literally writing out those solos and doing them on your own. What are some other ways you learned how to improvise? Especially when you were first starting out. It's crazy to me to think, I kind of just took it for granted because we grew up in show business that everybody would like stand up and play music, but you must have been terrified. I mean, you were 16, that's insane. So like, how did you, when you were first starting out, how did you do this? How did you learn, how did you develop those improvisational skills? Like when someone pointed to you or, nodded to you to start playing, what happened?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. We grew up in a show business family, so it just seemed like a natural thing to do for somebody to stand up and make noise come out of their instrument and somehow make sense. And whether or not It's true, but whether or not what I played made sense in those early years, I think because I grew up around that so much that when somebody just pointed at me and said, "Take a solo," I just said, "Okay, whatever." I have no idea what I played. You know, somewhere out there is a recording that myself and Patrick Cornelius and a bunch of us made in high school. That
Oh, I'd love to see that.
I know. I'm scared that that's going to find its way on the internet one of these days. I think Patrick Cornelius has that under lock and key. He's a great saxophone player out of New York, by the way. You should check him out. But I just kind of went for it, and I had the atmosphere and the guidance and the mentorship that would allow me to do that. You know, you mentioned Small World. Well, I mean, you couldn't ask for a better training ground than those two. Polly and Kyle, they were so gracious to let the younger generation come up on the stage with them and fall flat on our faces night after night. I mean, you want to talk about taking a risk and bearing your soul? Talk about taking a risk and letting a bunch of no-name idiot kids get on your stage and make terrible sounds for the paying public, you know, every week. And yet they kept that going for 25 years because they were developing a legacy. And, you know, I mean, it wasn't just me. Uncle George, our uncle, he learned how to play standards from them too. I think our dad used to go play with them when he was younger. And so that's 3 generations of musicians that particular duo raised. So it was just a kind of, here's the deep end, learn how to swim kind of thing. And, you know, I think a lot of that's missing right now. I've noticed in my own teaching and my own environment is that we've become such a closed off society, you know, just doing this all the time. It's harder and harder to convince the younger generation that they need to get out there on the bandstand and fall flat on their face a few gazillion times because they're expecting it to happen like that, you know. So I call it the Jackson Pollock method of jazz improvisation in the early stages. It's let's just throw it all up on the canvas and see what sticks. So it wasn't later until I started actually studying music and in particular comp that my solos actually started making some kind of cogent sense, some kind of logic to it.
Tell me about that. I mean, for you, what is a solo? What are you trying to do in that moment? So in that moment, you know, I want to try to replay this for those who aren't familiar with jazz, is that, you know, in a jazz song, you'll hear, like you said, you know, the first few bars, the first few measures, and then, you know, some lone musician will, you know, kind of come to the head of the stage, or everybody else will quiet down. And there's that moment where everyone's focused on you. So what do you want to say within that song? What are your goals with a solo, and how do you get there creatively?
Well, let's see. My primary goal with the solo is to not suck. My primary goal, my main approach to an improvised solo is it sounds kind of cliche, but you know, they always say tell a story with your solo. They don't give you any more direction than that other than tell a story. So
what does that mean? Because I'm a writer, so like that really appeals to me in a big way. What does that mean to tell a story through music?
I didn't know for a long time. Now it's it just depends on what kind of story I want to tell. But yeah, or do I want to tell a story? Or do I want to describe something? You know, like telling a story to me in a jazz solo means like writing a novel, and I don't want to write a novel when I have literally 3 minutes to talk, right? But maybe in that 3 minutes, instead of, you know, going from, you know, the Star Destroyer attacking the Corellian cruiser all the way to burning Vader's body, I can describe the sound of the blasters coming from the Star Destroyer, or I can describe the smell of the Ewoks. I'm sure it was terrible. You know, I could take some tiny little, yes, I'm very, no,
it's awesome.
I'm a Star Wars guy, you know?
I knew Star Wars was going to come into this somehow.
Only 1 month away. That's all I got to say. 1 month away.
I know. So. No, yes. I mean, no, I think that's so interesting, because I would have never thought, like, I'm gonna think about Star Wars in the middle of, like, I don't know.
Well, here's the thing, though. I'm not consciously thinking. No, Misty is I wouldn't try to describe a Star Destroyer in Misty. I would try to describe, that scene with Luke and Leia when they're in that pit,
So you would draw on that.
Nice men, I am nice men, that kind of that thing. And then of course the drummer comes in with a solo like C-3PO, Captain Solo, Captain Solo. So weird, Solo, Captain Solo. Anyway, or I'm not gonna try to tell the whole saga of my life in every solo, but I might describe the color of my wife's eyes. I might think about that. I might talk about my dog running around the house. That seems more manageable. It's not necessarily writing a book. It's more like writing a poem than anything else.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying. I never would have guessed that. I never would have imagined in a million years. This is so interesting to me. It's that, you're drawing from this wellspring of emotion, of emotional memories. So it's not Princess Leia. It's like true love. It's not the story of you and your wife's marriage. It's her eyes. It's something that it's much more emotional that you're tapping into to tell that story. And sometimes you can only really tell that story through music. Like words aren't.
It has to.
Yeah.
Yeah. It has to be elemental.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be something that's elemental and universal, I think, in order to evoke an emotion. Yeah, you could talk about love a gazillion different ways, but that doesn't. Well, oh gosh, what's the scene from Good Will Hunting? You can describe the roof of the Sistine Chapel, but you can't tell me what it smells like in there.
Yeah.
It's kind of along those lines. Not everybody knows about me and my wife. Not everybody knows about love, but everybody has seen a woman's eyes, unless they're blind, which I'm sorry. But you know what I mean? Everybody has heard of.
I'm with you.
Everybody's experienced something that fundamental. And I think, if you spend so much time trying to tell the whole story, you're gonna lose a lot of the audience. Rather, if you just focus in on that one thing and just dive into that, and esoteric, I could guarantee you, I'm not thinking about this 100% of the time, but when I'm on, these are the kind of, you can't even really put words to what I'm trying to describe sometimes, because it's music. It's not words. It's a different thing. It's a different language, but it is a language.
Yeah. And that's what I'm wondering too. I'm thinking about the writers who might be watching this. Do you ever go into a solo thinking like, I'm gonna tell the story of my wife's eyes, and then it is not working? It is not like, what do you do?
Then you rely on technique.
No offense to Sally.
No, it happens.
I know that's all you think about, but you know what I mean. Whatever it is, Princess Leia.
If I were a true Zen master, maybe it would happen 100% of the time, but I'm not. I'm a human being and I'm fallible. So I would say it happens maybe 3 out of every 10 times that I'm that on and that effective in what I'm trying to. The rest of the time, it's, for lack of a better term, it's hard work and technique and study and practice. And that's what you rely on. You can't rely on emotions all the time. You kind of have to know how to play the instrument to the level of be able to express yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of it is, when the emotion, the magic, the flowers and fairies aren't happening that night, a lot of it is just being really freaking good at what you do.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, look, on the subject of technique, a lot of people would say, Ornette Coleman was one of the first great free jazz improvisers, like free improvisation, all that stuff. And a lot of people would say he was a terrible saxophone player, but he was the perfect saxophone player for the kind of music that he wanted to play and the kind of musical ideas he was trying to express.
Yeah.
So, that's what I mean by technique. It's the ability to convey the exact musical idea that you want to convey. For my part, I tend to be a little bit more technical than creative a lot of times. But, I'm sure for writers, it would be impossible for you to write anything without knowing how a sentence is supposed to be constructed.
Well, I think there are times when I feel, and maybe you feel this too, I feel this muse like come into me. And I'm not, maybe I was a hippie at one time. I'm not anymore, but I'm a recovering hippie. I'll say that. But there are times creatively, I feel something kind of take over me. And I, like you said, I feel like I can tap into something. But like you said, that's probably when I write, that's probably out of 20 times that might happen once. Like the rest is, like you said, technique, it's studying, it's thinking about, you know, crafting the sentence in a way that will be unique. It's really, it's very analytical. It's, you know, I think that we tend to over romanticize creativity a lot. And I think that happens. And you felt it. I think anybody who's watching, you know, this broadcast, if you're an artist, you felt that. But I think sometimes we think, you know, but I'll sit down tonight to write, you know, do a sprint or for 20 minutes, and that muse may come and that muse may just not come.
Yeah,
and so I have to kind of, you know, so what do I do? Like you said, you can't just stop like in the middle of a song, like, sorry guys,
not feeling it tonight, going home.
Yeah, exactly. The show must go on, guys. You know, like you have to keep writing. Yeah, and you have to keep playing. So I wanted to talk about, I have my list of questions here on my other screen. I wanted to talk about, what is the role for you? Because I know you talked a lot about, you know, falling flat on your face when you first started. And I know that feeling as a writer because I fell really flat on my face the first 20 drafts and with querying and things like that. And, you know, for me, failure has been integral to my process. And so I wanted to kind of hear from you, what has been the role of failure? What is the role of failure in the jazz solo?
Well, first we have to define failure in a jazz solo.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I want to get at.
I would say I failed. Well, okay. Failure in a jazz solo. That's a tough one because I can play probably one of the most technically perfect, harmonically and rhythmically perfect solos that you'd ever heard, and I could still consider that a failure.
Right.
You know, even though if you were to like write it out and analyze it, everything is flawless.
And why is that?
Because maybe that wasn't what I wanted to play. That's just what came out. In other words, I wasn't connected to the music. So I guess a successful solo for me is when I'm actually connected to the act of soloing. A lot of times it happens to the best of us. You go on autopilot. You know, I know this works over this chord. I know this scale works over this chord. I know I can play the melody here. I know I can quote Yankee Doodle Dandy over this, you know, phrase. And you know, that's fine. And that's called going on autopilot. Believe me, when you gig 7 nights a week for years and years and years and years, you will go on autopilot from time to time. I'm sure when you're sitting down to write, you'll go on autopilot and just write, just for the sake of, I got to get something out and get it done because it's work. This is what we do. This is also our jobs. But an unsuccessful solo is when I'm just doing that, when I'm just completely on autopilot, or when I'm trying to force something out the other end of the spectrum, the other extreme, where nothing is working on autopilot. So I have to think to get something out. That's I don't know if the audience can tell, but I sure as hell can tell if that's what's happening. So if I'm like trying to force something out that maybe I've never played before or never worked on, or just I'm not hearing it right up in my head, that's an unsuccessful solo to me too. So there's a balance between like awesome technique and awesome musicality and creative genius, right? And it's a huge spectrum. It's not a one thing. You kind of froze up here. I don't know if you're still catching all this.
You know, having this really, really intense, I think my network's off again. But you're having this, you're really kind of working through this very, very serious issue. Did you hear what I'm saying? I don't know if it
I didn't hear the beginning of this line.
Okay. So I feel like, you know, what you were saying, I feel like, you know, when you've soloed, there are two atoms that tend to emerge. And I've seen both of them. I've seen one where you're just like gone, like you're in outer space, you're like completely gone. And you are on another planet. And then there's this, and it's great. It's fantastic. And then there's another atom that I've seen solo where you are like, you're staring at the floor. You were just trying, like, it's like algebra or something. You're trying to figure out, like you were trying to you're trying to get through to something, you know? And so I'm wondering, you know, what what are those different states for you? What is that experience of creativity for you?
Well, the outer space Adam is definitely on autopilot more often than not.
You're just chilling, like you're just enjoying yourself. And
yeah, I'm not going to think. I've played this song 1,000 times. I'm just going to play some notes, and somebody's going to clap at the end of this, whatever, and then I'll go get a drink or something. Not anymore, but that's definitely autopilot Adam. Staring at the floor Adam is okay. That I've been practicing like 3 to 6 hours a day for the past month. This lick better freaking work this time, or I swear to God, I'm gonna go ballistic. So I think the best, you might have witnessed the third Adam, because I've noticed this about myself too. You might have witnessed the third Adam is staring straight ahead, not specifically at anybody in the audience. Although back in the older days, if she was cute, I'd be looking at her. Not staring specifically at anything. Not in outer space, not staring at the floor in concentration, just we call it being in the zone, right? And that's the Adam that's connected to both the outer space Adam and the staring at the floor Adam. That's the Adam that's connected to both the creative and the technical at the same time. I'm drawing equally from both. So it's kind of funny because like one's up here, but the good one is here all the time.
Yeah, right. Oh, I know exactly what you're saying. I feel like the parallels to writing are just so similar, because there are these moments where I just like word vomit comes out, and then there are these moments where I'm sitting down, I'm just like really like I have to make this work and it's not working. And I think part of if you can kind of marry a lot of those things, I think that's when you really have those breakthroughs. But I think it takes work, and I think that's what I really when I talk to writers, I think that a lot of people and I'm sure you feel the same way about jazz. A lot of jazz artists, emerging jazz artists, it's like they think it's like all fun and games, and it is fun. It's really fun. It's fun to be a writer. I'm sure it's fun to be a jazz artist, but it's also just a hell of a lot of work. I think a lot of sometimes it's hard for people to grasp that. It doesn't come easy.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the arts, the lay person or anybody that's outside of the arts, I always say they tend to think of what we do as wizardry.
Yeah.
It was funny. I was sitting at a coffee shop one time writing. I was composing. I have the computer set up and composing away, and somebody actually came and sat down next to me and says, "Oh my God, are you doing music?" I'm like, yeah. Like, so this is. Can I hear it? It's like, no, you don't want to hear. This is crap. Or another case in point.
Right.
When I sit here, I come to work early and I practice. I try to get at least a good hour before my students get in, so I don't sound like crap when they show up, because they suck, because they're paying thousands of dollars to come here. So but if you were to walk by my office at 8 o'clock in the morning while I'm like, today is a perfect example. I'm working on a Bach cello suite. You would have heard more cussing coming out of my office than you would from like the USS Ticonderoga on Liberty Call. I mean, it was, I don't know how clean you want this, but there were some words being shouted out in the office, right? And I kind of have this thing I tell my students, like, look, if you're practicing and it sounds good, then you have ceased practicing. You are now performing. You've moved into this world where you're not working on anything right now. Now you're performing. And guess what? You're performing for nobody. And what do we call it when you perform for nobody? Starts with an M. So stop. If you sound good while you're practicing, then you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. See, I love that, because I think that, when I started National Novel Writing Month, and that's who I really want to reach with this broadcast, is I studied literature. I had a PhD in literature. I wanted everything I wrote to be beautiful and good and amazing, and it wasn't. It was crap. It was terrible. It was terrible. And it took me, and it's still, I think my writing has improved, absolutely. Like you said, I worked on my technique. I've gotten feedback. I've worked really, really hard to improve my technique. But the first draft is still, even after learning all that stuff, it's still awful. Like the first thing I've written, it is still awful, and I have to really work at it. And it's interesting to me, like you said, you know, you have had this illustrious career in music. I don't know anyone, any musician, not that I know tons of musicians, but I really don't know any musician who has more to boast about than you. I mean, you've done it, and you have the piece of paper to prove your credibility. But you're still, like you said, you know, it doesn't matter. In the end, you still have to keep working and keep working at that. You know, so I think a lot of times in the arts, we have this idea that, you know, somehow we'll achieve this level of mastery and everything will be perfect. And, you know, or even worse, we have this idea of the you know, the genius who, you know, Mozart, and everything that comes out of, you know, is perfect. And gosh, I wish we could just end those romantic fantasies, because it's so ridiculous. And I think that, you know, I didn't write for a long time because I was living under that false pretense that I'm a writer, it should be amazing.
Right. Well, it's not, and you know what? It's not the artist that does that. It's I hate to pull the victim card, but it really is everybody that's not an artist that does that to us, and we allow ourselves to listen to it. You know, when I started, as you mentioned, I started when I was 16, and I was a 16-year-old jazz jock. Like, it was not even like, I almost felt like a football player sometime, you know, because I was called a genius. There's this 16-year-old wunderkind genius and everything. Man, I don't even want to hear what that crap sounded like back then, you know. But because I was 16 and playing gigs, I was a genius. And then I hate to say it, but as a bass player, it doesn't take much to impress people, because look at the size of this dang thing. Okay, I don't have to play a lot in order to look like I know what I'm doing on the bass. Bad bass players work all the time. And yeah, I'll make that value call. I don't care. But it's easy for us to fall into the trap as artists of succumbing to what society says about us. And I'm not even talking about critical reviews or anything like that. I'm just talking about the average person. Oh, your music sounds wonderful. Man, I can't tell you how many times I've walked off a bandstand off of like the worst, in my opinion, worst musical set in my life. Like, play out of tune, terrible time, wrong changes, bad melody, horrible solos, disconnected from the music. I mean, I could go down my top 10 list of bad things that happened, right? And I walk off the bandstand and somebody comes and says, man, you guys sounded amazing. I'm like, you know, my first impulse, and I have to fight it because it is a public thing that I do. Right. My first impulse is to look at the guy and say, what the fuck do you know? You have no clue how terrible that was, right? You know, but you can't do that in public. You just say, oh, thank you for coming out and listening and putting your $1 in the tip jar, and please buy the CD. So yeah, you know, that's right. Stick around. We have another set coming. I hope you enjoyed the veal. Yeah.
And I think sometimes we tend to do that to ourselves as artists too. That because you also never want to show people. You know, you never want to break a sweat. You know, you never want, because that's a part of showbiz, right? That's a part of performance and being a professional. So you may be having the worst set of your life and everything's horrible, and you know, but you still have to be professional. You still have to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, not to negate anything that writers do, but you guys sit in the house and do it, you know, and yeah, it goes out to the public eventually, but what the public sees is your finished product.
Yeah.
As finished as it's going to get. And now that I've actually made a CD as a leader, I kind of understand a little bit, because, you know, the CD, each one of those songs was a minimum of 5 takes.
Yeah.
And there was still, after that, there was still mixing and mastering, and that was after edits and things like that. So, you know, now that I've actually seen the long-term process of putting out a product, whereas beforehand my product was me on the bandstand in front of people, that's a whole different can of worms. So, you know, that I kind of dig that. I was reading up on the nano thing. It's kind of cool. Like, you have a month to write this whole thing, right?
Yeah.
It appealed to me because you got to sit down and do it. It's kind of like what I do on the bandstand. I have to sit down and do it to get the business done. So
yeah, and that's why I wanted you to talk, because I know, you know, I did Nano, my first book that's coming out in February. That's what got me started. And to like kind of get over, you know, my doubts, my insecurities, What do you think for you? What are some, because I know, I mean, I've talked about how awesome you are, but I know you have doubts and insecurities, maybe. How do you get through that in your creative process within soloing? So like if you're starting a solo and you're like, oh boy, things are good.
What do I do? Yeah. Yeah, we
How
call
do
that
you,
Giant Steps.
what's that?
We call that song Giant Steps.
Yeah.
No, well, first, it took me a long time to admit that just being a bull in a china shop and just playing anything for the sake of anything isn't necessarily the most artistic approach to soloing. So that's when I started working on the technique and the theory and the transcribing, all that stuff. That was, I would say I was probably about 22 or 23 when that really started kicking in. Yeah, that was about the age. And now it's just it's a general acceptance that it's not always going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's I've been doing, I've been going through a year of like a lot of self-help and a lot of self-actualization. I'm an alcoholic in recovery. I don't worry about as much as I used to. And one of the big things that I've learned is acceptance of just things are what they are. It is. Yeah. It can't be anything else. If I get a song called on the bandstand that I might not be that familiar with and my technique might not be up to the challenge, then I just accept, hey, this might suck. So, and my biggest insecurity right now is.
I just pause. I just really want everyone, if you're a beginning writer and you're in NaNoWriMo, just accept that this might suck.
Yeah, right. Hey,
this might suck because it probably does.
Yeah. Right.
So okay. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay it's okay. It's okay. That's all I can say about that. Well, no, I could probably say a few more things if I thought about it. So let me think about it for a second. My biggest insecurity right now isn't even like, I don't even really consider it my insecurity. I think it's other people's insecurities being projected on me is, can I play classical music well enough? Mm-hmm. That's the big one in my life right now. Right?
Yeah. So we all have our things. And I think too, and I know this happens for writers a lot, that you get kind of pigeonholed, like this is what you write, or you write fantasy, or you write horror, or you write suspense or romance. And it's, I mean, I'm writing romance right now and I love it and I'm really enjoying it, but I don't know if I want to write it all the time. There are other things I want to explore as an artist. And I think that's something, that I think too, and even if you're just starting out in NaNoWriMo or something, to think about, when I first started writing the book that's coming out, I really just wanted to write, a silly little kind of paranormal romance. And the book that actually ended up happening, it was really not what I had imagined at all. And so I think that being open to your own potential, I think, is really, really key, and going after it and not listening to what other people are telling you what to do or what to write or what to play or what to compose.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I think, I learned a lot about this kind of stuff when I was studying composition. It's taken that course of study for my master's degree as opposed to sticking with jazz really changed my life because it slowed my thinking down. It took me away from the realm of do into the realm of thought, into the intellectual areas. And that really informed my solos, whereas it used to be, my solos would be like, up and down the neck, look at all the stuff I can do. I learned how to take a step back and take like a musical idea and just develop it and develop it and develop it, and turn it inside out and turn it upside down and play it backwards and play it forwards and play it in a different key, play it in a different octave, play it all over the map, and then expand upon it. And it took time to get to that point, and that's kind of what I deal with every day. That's my ultimate goal, I think, is to be able to take a musical idea and do that all the way back to the beginning of our conversation.
Yeah. So I know you're teaching a lot of these youngins now, these up and coming jazz musicians. What are some of the things that you teach them about creativity and improvisation and listening to your instincts. And I don't know, what do you do with that? I think that's just such an odd job. Like I teach literature, and I taught literature for years.
Right.
I don't know if I could teach creative writing, because I just think it's like, I don't know what to do with that. Oh, I don't.
Yeah,
how do you approach that?
There's a few different avenues to approach that. One, we are dealing with music. It is a finite thing.
Right.
There is a mathematical component to it. I'm sure there's algebra teachers somewhere down at Texas State going, "Ha, told you." It's true. There's quantifiable things that that occur in a jazz solo. So we go through those kind of things, the harmonic stuff, how to play the scale, how to arpeggiate the chord, how to make a line go from this chord to that chord. We work on that kind of stuff a lot, and I would imagine in literature you read a lot of books, right? And you study how
absolutely
write stuff. Well, we do the same thing in jazz. We transcribe a lot of solos, and that's kind of the same thing. We listen to the greats. We figure out how they would connect a 2-5-1 chord progression, and we try to emulate that. I think you clocked out again.
Sorry. Are you back?
I'm here. I see you.
Okay, great. Sorry. It's my internet. I live out in the middle of nowhere.
But you have two internets.
Yeah, I know. Next time I'll use the other one. So what about the creative? So, because I think like teaching, I don't teach writing, but I think, I do work on a lot of writing with other people, and I've definitely had conversations about, plot structure and things like that, and creating tension and setting and description, those sort of things. So I feel like, there are just fundamentals. It took me a while to learn them, but I think there are just fundamentals to good storytelling that we can use and rely on. It doesn't mean that they limit us, but they can be extremely useful.
Right. Well, I mean, exactly. It's the same thing in jazz. There's fundamentals that you can use. Hold on, somebody's knocking on my door here. Might have a student. Wait 1 minute. We have 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. All right. So in our last 5 minutes, what would you tell that young storyteller out there who's just getting started, who's kind of staring at her computer screen right now and is just afraid and not sure where to start, not sure where to go? Maybe they're stuck in the middle of a story and they don't know what to do next. What would you tell as a jazz musician who faces this issue all the time, every night, like you said, 7 nights a week? You might run into this issue. What would you tell that writer?
You have two options: keep going or quit.
Yeah.
If you keep going, stress fundamentals, what has always worked in the past, what do you know about, what can you write, what do you know you can write about that minute, what do you use in that particular second. You almost never come up with a blank. The composer side of me is saying, if that particular part of the book or the story isn't coming out of you at that particular point in time, go work on a different part of the book. Like when I write music, I almost never write from beginning to end. I actually go the opposite direction. I figure out where I want to end the song or the phrase or something like that, and then I figure out how I'm going to get there. That's
me too. Yeah, that's how I write.
Yeah, use structure to your advantage. Just because it's structure, we think very linearly in Western culture, Western art. We think very like point A to point B. Study the Eastern people, because they don't think that way. They think about just here, there. It's all part of the big blob of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So you have other places you can look. You don't have to just stop at that one part and go, I don't know what to do. You could go, I don't know what to do. Let's take out this other thing right now. So you keep going, and while you're working on that other thing, the idea for that one thing that you were stuck at might just pop into your head, or So stress your fundamentals. Don't don't kick yourself too much for being stuck in one spot. Just go work on something else for a while.
Yeah.
You know,
I love that. Go ahead. Sorry.
Just do the smart thing and make sure that you have, you know, figure out how you operate. I say, you know, with students, that's one of the things I tell them, like, try to practice the same time every day. Find out what time of day you're the most productive when it comes to practicing and listening to music, you know, and try to make that happen every day. Don't try to do something different every day. They say the same thing in sports training. If you're exercising or something like that, you know, exercise when you're most productive, when your body's most productive. Shake it up a bit once in a while, though. It's kind of fun. But, you know, if you try to, there are ways that you can make life easier for yourself than just kicking yourself in the face because you're stuck on a spot.
Yeah.
You know, I've been stuck on Bach's Prelude to his D minor cello suite for about 5 or 6 years now, and I finally yesterday figured out a spot to it because I was working other stuff at the time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
I know for myself, and I like what you said, you know, just keep going, rely on those fundamentals. I know when I am stuck, I just ask myself, what would J.K. Rowling do? You know, like, and think about what she would do and copy that. And yeah, maybe it ends up really cliche in that first draft, but that's what, you know, luckily, unlike you, I can go back and change it. And so I think sometimes
99% of the time nobody's recording, so I can go back and play it differently the next time I play that song. So, yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much.
Unlike you, once I've played it, it's gone. It's not in print anywhere. It's
right.
bye-bye. So I can forget about it and I can move on.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. This has been so interesting. I don't think we've ever really had this conversation before, so it's been really interesting. And I know for myself, I feel really inspired to kind of listen to those jazz records, listen to some Miles Davis, and get back into those creative, that creative spirit. But what I really think is really useful is that it is a marriage between creativity and technique, and I think that's and to keep working, and it's work. It's not just la-di-da, writing, doing jazz. It's a lot of work, and I really appreciate you sharing that process with us today. So
it's my pleasure. Ask me anytime.
All right. Well, enjoy your student and have fun and enjoy your Bach and soloing. And I will see you next time. Thank you.
All right. Bye, sis.
Bye, brother. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye.